The sun was setting over the sprawling acres of the McKinley Ranch, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and the distant hum of cicadas. It was a typical evening for Tom McKinley, a rugged man in his late 30s with a weathered face and a heart as tough as the land he worked. He had spent the day repairing fences and tending to his herd of goats, a motley crew of mischievous, free-spirited animals that were as much a part of the ranch as the dirt beneath his boots. Tom wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against his pickup truck, taking a moment to appreciate the quiet solitude of his land. He had inherited the ranch from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. It was more than just property. It was a legacy, a piece of history that had been passed down through generations. And now, it was his to protect. But as he stepped out of his truck, the familiar crunch of gravel beneath his boots was interrupted by an unfamiliar sound. It was a low, rhythmic hum, like the distant chanting of a cult. Tom frowned, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. What he saw made his blood boil. In the middle of his property, where his favorite fishing spot should have been, was a scene straight out of a surrealist painting. A dozen women in pastel leggings stood in perfect formation, their arms stretched toward the sky. A few feet away, a man in flowing white robes beat a small drum, his voice rising and falling in a melody that sounded suspiciously like whale noises. An enormous banner strung between two of Tom's oak trees read, "Serenity in the Wild, Yoga Retreat." Tom blinked, his mind struggling to process the absurdity of the scene. He checked the sign again, half expecting to find that he had somehow wandered onto someone else's land. But no, this was his ranch, his dirt, his peace, hijacked by an army of suburban yogis. His pulse quickened as his gaze settled on the unmistakable figure of Linda Harper, the self-appointed queen of the local homeowners association, HOA. Linda was a woman who had spent years trying to impose ridiculous rules on people who had never asked for them. She was the kind of person who would fine you for having the wrong color mailbox or leaving your trash cans out too long. And now, she was standing in the middle of his property, waving at him like she was welcoming him to his own funeral. "Tom, you made it," Linda called out, her voice dripping with faux enthusiasm. Tom crossed his arms, his voice sharp. "You mind telling me why there's a spiritual Woodstock happening on my land?" Linda clasped her hands together, beaming with the kind of smug satisfaction that made Tom's teeth itch. "I sent you an email. Didn't you get it?" Tom didn't even have to check. "No, Linda, I didn't get an email saying you planned to turn my ranch into a..." He gestured at the group of people stretching in perfect synchronization, Lululemon cult. Linda let out a dramatic sigh. "Tom, this is for the community. The HOA wanted a wellness retreat, and since your land is so open, I figured, why not?" Tom felt a nerve twitch in his jaw. "You figured?" She waved a hand as if he was being unreasonable. "I even took care of all the details. We have a professional instructor, organic refreshments, and a full weekend itinerary. It's a win-win. People get relaxation, and you get to be part of something wonderful." Tom stared at her, then at the rows of expensive-looking glamping tents set up along his favorite fishing spot. He took in the long buffet table covered in quinoa salads, gluten-free muffins, and, God help him, cucumber-infused water. Then he turned back to Linda. "You have 30 minutes to clear out," he said flatly. Linda's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Tom," she laughed, pulling out a folder. "You can't do that." She flipped to a highlighted section of a legal-looking document. As per the revised HOA regulations, the association has temporary authority to host community events in designated areas. "I marked your ranch as an official recreational zone." Tom snatched the paper from her hands and skimmed it. It was complete nonsense, legal jargon mixed with fake HOA bylaws, clearly meant to intimidate him. The problem was, Linda was clever enough to know that if she threw enough paperwork at people, most would just give up and let her have her way. Too bad for her. Tom wasn't most people. He took a deep breath, clenching and unclenching his fists as he tried to ignore the sound of the yoga instructor announcing something called the breath of the universe. He should have just called the cops. He should have told everyone to pack up and leave. But then he saw Linda turn to one of the guests and say, loud enough for him to hear, "Don't worry, darlings. Ranch folk like Tom always overreact. He'll calm down once he realizes this is out of his hands." Something inside him snapped. Fine. If she wanted a retreat in nature, she was about to get one. Without another word, Tom turned on his heel and walked straight to the far end of the ranch, where 50 of his most adventurous, nosy, and downright chaotic goats were lounging by the fence. Now, Tom's goats weren't ordinary goats. These were free-range menaces, raised on the principle that if something was within reach, it was probably edible, climbable, or headbutt-worthy. They had once broken into his neighbor's truck and eaten the seat cushions. Another time, they had organized themselves into an attack squad and chased an entire group of hikers off the property. And now, they had a mission. Tom swung the gate open and whistled. 50 heads lifted in unison, curious eyes locked onto him. Tails flicked with excitement. They sensed mischief was afoot. "Go get him, boys," Tom said, stepping aside. The goats bolted like greased lightning, hooves kicking up dust as they charged toward the unsuspecting yoga enthusiasts. Within seconds, the peaceful retreat turned into absolute chaos. One goat headbutted a woman mid-downward dog, sending her tumbling into a pile of yoga mats. Another climbed on top of a meditating man's back, using him as a perch while chewing on his ponytail. A particularly feisty goat locked eyes with the guru leading the session and let out a battle cry before lunging at his rope. Linda shrieked as a goat yanked her designer tote bag out of her hands and took off running, its hooves kicking over a pitcher of cucumber water. "Tom," she screeched, dodging another goat that was gnawing on the corner of her flowy cardigan. "Call them off." Tom leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching the carnage unfold. "Oh, I would, Linda," he said, barely containing his grin. "But the HOA says this is a designated recreational area. Seems like my goats are just enjoying their natural environment." Linda stomped her foot, which only made things worse because the second she did, one of the bigger goats, a seasoned troublemaker named Diesel, took it as a challenge and charged straight at her. The scream that followed was one for the history books. By the time Linda managed to climb onto the buffet table, the only semi-safe place left, the retreat had fully collapsed into a stampede of shrieking guests, flipped over snack tables, and yoga mats being torn apart like chew toys. Tom took out his phone and snapped a picture. Best Saturday ever. Linda clung to the buffet table as if it were the last lifeboat on a sinking ship, her designer yoga cardigan now resembling Swiss cheese, thanks to an especially determined goat. Around her, absolute pandemonium unfolded. The once serene retreat, carefully curated with its soft instrumental music and perfectly placed scented candles, had turned into an all-out war zone between overly enthusiastic goats and horrified yoga enthusiasts. The peaceful hum of meditation was now replaced with panicked screams, hooves clattering against wood, and the unmistakable sound of something expensive shattering. A woman in neon leggings attempted to run, but a goat had latched onto the hem of her yoga pants and was now engaged in an enthusiastic game of tug-of-war. She yelped, flailing her arms as she tried to break free, but the goat wasn't letting go. A second later, the leggings gave way with a loud rip, sending the poor woman tumbling into a pile of half-chewed granola bars. Guru Devon, the self-proclaimed spiritual guide of the retreat, stood in the center of the madness, eyes wide with disbelief. Just moments ago, he had been preaching about inner peace and cosmic alignment. Now he was locked in what could only be described as a battle for dominance with a particularly aggressive goat named Buttercup. Buttercup had taken offense to his chanting and was now circling him like a boxer in the ring. Devon attempted to wave his arms in a calming motion, but Buttercup saw it as an invitation to charge. With a fierce bleat, she lunged, knocking him flat on his back. His drum went flying, landing with a hollow thud next to a pile of toppled herbal tea containers. Tom leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching the disaster unfold with a satisfied smirk. He had known his goats would create chaos, but even he had underestimated just how determined they could be when given the freedom to explore a new environment. They weren't just causing trouble for fun, they were thriving in it. Linda, now realizing she had completely lost control, attempted to regain authority. "Everyone, remain calm," she shouted, her voice wobbling as a goat leaped onto the table beside her. "It's just a minor inconvenience." The goat beside her let out a loud, guttural bleat and promptly shoved an entire tray of quinoa salad off the table with its nose. The bowl shattered on the ground, sending a shower of leafy greens into the air. Linda shrieked, clutching her head as if she had just witnessed a crime scene. Across the yard, A group of women had taken refuge inside one of the glamping tents, pulling the fabric flap down as if it would protect them from the onslaught of hooved invaders. Unfortunately for them, goats were natural-born climbers. A trio of mischievous goats had already figured out how to scale the tent, perching themselves on top like kings of the mountain. One of them, a particularly fearless daredevil named Peanut, poked his head through the tent flap, causing the women inside to let out synchronized screams. Tom let out a deep chuckle as he watched Linda frantically try to shoo away another goat that had taken a particular interest in her hair. The animal sniffed it, chewed a bit of the air, then, to Linda's horror, took a large bite of her meticulously styled blonde bob. She screamed, swatting at the goat, but it had already lost interest and was now sniffing around for better snacks. Guru Devon, having recovered from his takedown, tried once again to salvage the retreat. "We must embrace the energy of the universe," he called out, shaking what was left of his drum. "These creatures are merely manifestations of the wild spirit within us. Let us welcome them with love." A goat promptly knocked him into a bucket of organic kombucha. One of the guests, a middle-aged woman who had clearly had enough, grabbed her designer purse and swung it at a goat that was chewing on her yoga mat. "Shoo! Go away," she yelled, but the goat barely flinched. Instead, it grabbed her purse strap in its teeth and yanked. Within seconds, a full-blown tug-of-war commenced, with the woman digging her heels into the ground and the goat pulling with all its might. The inevitable happened. The strap snapped, and the woman tumbled backward, landing in a patch of goat droppings. Tom couldn't help it. He laughed hard. He hadn't laughed like this in years. There was something deeply satisfying about watching Linda's perfectly planned event crumble into absolute ruin. He had told her she had no right to his land, warned her that she was crossing a line, but she had dismissed him like he was just some insignificant nuisance. Now, she was knee-deep in the consequences of her own arrogance. Linda, now looking like she had survived a natural disaster, turned her furious gaze toward Tom. "This is sabotage," she screeched, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You did this on purpose." Tom shrugged, still grinning. "Didn't you say this was all about embracing nature? Looks like nature just embraced you back." Her nostrils flared, her face turning a blotchy shade of red. "I will sue you for this. I will take legal action." Before Tom could respond, a loud crash interrupted them. One of the goats had managed to knock over the refreshments table, sending an entire pitcher of green detox smoothie splattering onto the ground. The smell of kale and wheatgrass filled the air, mixing with the unmistakable scent of goat mischief. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the goats discovered the sound bowls. A group of them, now intrigued by the shiny metallic objects on the ground, began kicking, head-butting, and spinning them like tops, creating an eerie, clashing symphony of vibrating tones. It was an accidental goat concert, and the result was both chaotic and strangely mesmerizing. The guests, now beyond any hope of salvaging their weekend, grabbed their belongings, what was left of them, and ran for their cars. Linda, still standing on the buffet table, wiped a green smoothie stain from her cheek, trembling with rage. "This isn't over, Tom," she hissed. Tom smirked, tilting his hat. "Oh, I think it is." And with that, he watched as Linda finally admitted defeat, hopping down from the table and stomping toward her car, leaving behind a retreat in ruins, a field of wandering goats, and the sweet, sweet taste of victory. Linda stormed toward her car, her designer cardigan hanging in shredded tatters, her hair missing a noticeable chunk, and a faint smear of green detox smoothie still glistening on her cheek. The once esteemed HOA president, who had walked onto Tom's land as if she owned it, now resembled a woman who had survived a natural disaster, except the disaster had been 50 goats and her own arrogance. The other yoga retreat guests, some of them barefoot, others clutching their half-eaten mats, fled toward their vehicles, looking over their shoulders as if another wave of hoof destruction might chase them down. One woman muttered something about needing therapy after this. Another swore she'd never eat organic granola again. Guru Devon, still reeking of kombucha, sat cross-legged in the dirt, staring into the distance as though he had just uncovered some cosmic truth. Tom leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching it all unfold with immense satisfaction. He had spent years dealing with Linda's nonsense, her petty fines, her ridiculous complaints, her constant meddling in things that were none of her business. But this was the masterpiece. Linda stopped halfway to her car and spun back around, her heels sinking slightly in the dirt. Her hands clenched into trembling fists, and for a moment, it seemed like she was about to unleash a final monologue. Instead, she pointed at Tom, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You are going to regret this," she seethed. "Mark my words, Tom. I will sue you for damages. I will take legal action so fast your little ranch will be tied up in court for years. Do you hear me?" Tom tilted his head, pretending to consider it. "You sure you want to go the legal route, Linda? Because last time I checked, trespassing and fraud are still illegal." Linda's face paled just slightly, but she recovered quickly, folding her arms with an indignant huff. "Fraud? Don't be ridiculous. This was a community event, fully sanctioned by the HOA." Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, flipping the screen toward her. "You mean the one where you charged people $500 apiece to attend, even though this land isn't yours?" The color drained from her face completely. "Where did you get that?" Tom smirked. "Let's just say some of your guests weren't too happy when they realized you were pocketing the cash. A couple of them were real eager to send me the emails and payment receipts you sent out." He clicked to the next screen, showing a screenshot of a bank transaction with Linda's name right at the top. "Looks like fraud to me." Linda's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since she had stepped onto his property, she looked genuinely afraid. Tom gave her a slow nod. "Now, if you want to take this to court, we can. But I'm thinking once the authorities get involved, you might have bigger problems to deal with than some goat-related property damage." For a moment, she stood there, shoulders heaving, eyes darting left and right as if looking for an escape route. But there wasn't one. The retreat was ruined, her scam had been exposed, and she had nothing left to leverage. She turned on her heel without another word and marched straight to her car, yanking the door open so hard it nearly popped off the hinges. The second she slammed the door shut, her tires kicked up a storm of dirt as she sped away, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust, a defeated HOA, and a field still littered with scattered yoga props and half-chewed snacks. Tom let out a slow breath, shaking his head. He had expected Linda to put up a fight, but he hadn't expected her to crumble that fast. Maybe deep down, she had known this was a bad idea from the start. Or maybe she just wasn't used to people fighting back. Either way, she was gone, and his land was his again. One by one, the remaining guests left, some of them muttering apologies, others just bolting for their cars like they were fleeing a crime scene. Within minutes, the ranch was quiet again. Well, mostly quiet, except for the goats, who were still happily munching on whatever they could find. Tom glanced at the damage: a few overturned tables, some shredded yoga mats, and a lingering scent of patchouli oil mixed with goat fur. Nothing too bad. Hell, if anything, the goats had probably enjoyed themselves more than anyone else. He was about to start rounding them up when one of the remaining guests, a woman in her mid-40s, still holding a water bottle with a goat bite taken out of it, walked up to him. She hesitated, glancing around at the destruction before finally speaking. "I know this was chaotic," she said, offering a half-smile. "But honestly, this was the most fun I've had in years." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You call this fun?" She laughed. "It was real. I mean, sure, I came here expecting peace and meditation, but let's be honest, no one will ever forget this experience. Goat yoga, that's brilliant." Tom blinked. "Goat yoga?" She gestured around. "Yeah, I mean, obviously not like this, but controlled, organized, with actual planning. People would pay good money for something like this." Tom looked at the goats, then back at her. "You're telling me people would actually want to do yoga with these troublemakers?" She shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. Think about it. You could turn this into a real business. Call it, I don't know, hives and poses." Tom chuckled, shaking his head. The idea was ridiculous. It was insane. But then again, people had paid $500 to be here today. And if someone like Linda could sell a fake retreat, maybe he could actually do it right. He looked back at his goats. They were content, well-fed, and completely unbothered by the disaster they had caused. A couple of them were even lounging on the remains of a yoga mat, looking like they belonged there. Maybe, just maybe, there was something to this idea after all. Tom exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "You know what? That might not be the worst idea I've ever heard." The woman grinned. If you ever set it up, let me know. I'd be the first to sign up." As she walked away, Tom looked out over his ranch, now as again, and let out a deep, satisfied sigh. He hadn't just won. He had completely crushed Linda at her own game. And if there was a way to turn her disaster into a victory for himself, well, that was just an extra bonus. He grabbed his phone, snapped one last picture of the goats lounging in the wreckage, and sent it to his buddy with a short message. "Ever heard of goat yoga? Because I think I just found my new business." The sun was rising over the McKinley Ranch, casting a golden glow across the fields. Tom stood on the porch of his farmhouse, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, watching as his goats roamed freely, their playful bleats filling the morning air. It had been a week since the infamous yoga retreat, and the ranch was finally back to normal, or as normal as it could be with 50 mischievous goats running amok. But something had changed. The chaos of that day had sparked an idea, one that Tom couldn't shake. He had spent the past few days researching, planning, and even reaching out to a few local yoga instructors. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the woman from the retreat might have been onto something. Goat yoga. It sounded absurd, but then again, so did charging people $500 for a fake wellness retreat. And yet, Linda had managed to pull it off, until the goats intervened, of course. But what if he could do it right? What if he could create an experience that was both fun and authentic, something that people would genuinely enjoy? Tom took a sip of his coffee, his mind racing with possibilities. He could see it now, groups of people laughing as goats wandered among them, their playful antics adding a unique twist to the traditional yoga practice. It would be a blend of nature, humor, and relaxation, a true escape from the stresses of everyday life. And the best part? It would be on his terms. No Linda, no HOA, no ridiculous rules. Just him, his goats, and a bunch of people looking for a good time. Tom smiled to himself as he stepped off the porch and headed toward the barn. He had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long time, he felt excited about the future. The ranch had always been his sanctuary, his refuge from the outside world. But now, it could be something more, a place where people could come together, let loose, and maybe even find a little bit of peace. As he opened the barn door, the goats looked up at him, their curious eyes filled with mischief. Tom chuckled, shaking his head. "You guys ready to start a new adventure?" he asked. The goats responded with a chorus of bleats, their tails wagging with excitement. Tom grinned. "Yeah, me too." And with that, he got to work, ready to turn the chaos of that fateful day into something truly special. The McKinley Ranch was about to become the home of the most unique yoga experience in the country, and Tom couldn't wait to see where this new journey would take him. 6 months later, the McKinley Ranch had become a local sensation. Tom's goat yoga classes were fully booked weeks in advance, with people traveling from all over the state to experience the unique blend of yoga and goat mischief. The ranch was thriving, and for the first time in years, Tom felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that went beyond just maintaining his family's legacy. Linda, on the other hand, had quietly resigned from her position as HOA president and moved out of the neighborhood. Her failed retreat had become the stuff of local legend, and while she had tried to sue Tom for damages, the evidence of her fraudulent activities had quickly shut down any legal action. As for the goats, they were living their best lives. They had become the stars of the show, their playful antics delighting guests and adding a unique charm to the yoga sessions. Diesel, Buttercup, and Peanut had even gained a small following on social media, with fans eagerly awaiting updates on their latest adventures. Tom stood at the edge of the field, watching as a group of guests laughed and stretched, their yoga mats surrounded by curious goats. He couldn't help but smile. The ranch had always been his home, but now it was something more, a place of joy, laughter, and connection. And as he looked out over the land that had been in his family for generations, Tom knew that he had finally found his true calling. The McKinley Ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a legacy, a sanctuary, and now a destination. And it was all thanks to a little chaos, a lot of goats, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.